Good afternoon, everybody. I thank the organizers to invite me to talk on science and spirituality in this forum. Ironically, when I was in Jadavpur University for 6 to 7 years, I never got a chance to talk about this topic. All my lectures here were technical. But anyway, thank you for the invitation. So the topic I chose here, I call it Dogmatic Science and Pragmatic Spirituality. The reason I want to talk about it is that usually the perception is the opposite. We think of spirituality to be a completely dogmatic field and science to be very practical and useful. So I want to present you some analysis of myself on this topic and reflect on this later. Okay. So the common perception of spiritual or religious dogma that we see or hear is as follows. So all religions or spirituality, they are blamed for unquestionable scriptures. So that means you cannot question any topic that is raised in the scripture. That is one aspect of religious dogma, common perception. Second aspect is strict adherence to rituals, that if you are part of any particular religion, then you are told that you have to do things this way, that way, you have to follow this and that procedures. So that is one common aspect of religious dogma. And the third one is blind faith in the preachers of the particular religion or the spiritual sect, where you have to accept the sadhus or the mahatmas of that particular religion, whatever they have said, without argument. So these are the typical aspects of religious dogma that we always talk about, hear about, discuss about, and we pleasure about talking. Now, I invite you to look at science and have a close look at science and see that science is also not free from these three defects or dogma. So for example, the scriptural dogma of science consists of textbooks. So from childhood, whenever you study physics, chemistry or something, you have standard textbooks and you are never allowed to question normally, right? Whatever is written there, you accept it on blind faith. Second, see the research papers in journals or conference proceedings. So often we talk to our friends or our colleagues that, okay, this paper written by so-and-so author has been accepted in so-and-so journal and it claims this fact, so therefore it is true. In very rare cases, we ourselves go and verify that fact. We normally propagate whatever we see here. Okay. Second aspect, the ritualistic dogma of science. There can be many examples. I have chosen just a few. So for example, if you go into different colleges and different universities, say you go to the chemistry department, right, or the physics department. So they will have, for the same experiment, they will have different types of apparatus and sometimes they will have different brands also. And that sometimes become the identity of that institute. Okay, so if you are in, say, St. Xavier's College, you have this kind of thing. If you are in Presidency College, you have to follow this thing. And similarly for performing experiments also. And we forget that the real goal is to understand the concept, to observe the results of the experiment and to conclude. But this kind of ritualistic procedures are also part of it. Another example is tabulation of experimental observation. So I can tell you my experience when I was studying my higher secondary in St. Xavier's College. That time in our physics lab, there was one Professor Manjo. So he used to look into our practical notebook. So before every experiment, we had to draw the chart and draw the table according to some particular format and then show it to him. And if he is satisfied, then he will allow us to continue the experiment. Otherwise, he will throw away it and say, okay, you come next week. So that was that much important. So I used to think that, is it really important? Is not the experiment the actual thing? But later on, when I look back, I realized that the systematic way of recording or systematic way of doing the experiment and recording the data is also important in order to preserve it, in order to archive it, in order to compare two results on the same experiment by two different persons, and so on and so on. Okay, dogma of faith in science. So here also we invest faith in our teachers. So when we go to take science lessons, either in school or colleges or in university, we take the face value whatever the teacher says. Faith in renowned scientists. So for example, if Stephen Hawking says the universe started this way, then the universe must have started this way, right? There could not be any alternative view. However, recently last month in February in Physical Review B, there is a paper by two scientists from Canada which actually refuted this Hawking's Big Bang theory. You can check it out. Another important thing is faith in journal editors or program committees who select the papers of journals and conferences. So when we cite the papers as the scriptures of science, we actually put blind faith on the selection committee of those papers. Okay, so they are beyond doubt. Next, let us take a different shift and let us see what are the common perception of pragmatism in science. We say science is pragmatic, right? So the common view is that science tries to solve practical problems. It tries to make our life more comfortable. That is true. So that is one good practicality of science. Second is science is based on logic and reasoning. So it's not based on something blind or accept on face. And the third thing, science is verifiable. That means whatever claim is there, anybody can do an independent experiment and verify it, right? And what I propose that in each of these three sentences, replace the word science by spirituality, and the same thing holds. So when people blame religion and spirituality that they do not have these properties and only science have these properties, they take a very narrow look. I will explain how. So the first thing, problem-solving pragmatism of spirituality. So spirituality, I claim, tries to solve practical problems, tries to make our life more comfortable. How? We don't think about it. Science tries to fix the outside world. So, for example, we have electricity, we have cars, we have aeroplanes to fly around, we have medical facilities, we have lots of things to make our life more comfortable. That is due to science. But what if we are disturbed, we are depressed, we are not happy? Can we enjoy whatever facility is there outside? If a person is suffering from a loss of near and dear one, suppose one's very good friend or parents or beloved one has died, and then you invite that person to sit in an AC room, give nice food, will that person be able to enjoy? Not really. So, spirituality tries to fix the inside world. And in order to have a happy life, we have to have a balance between the two. If we have only the inside world is not happy and the outside world we have fixed everything, then we have no hope to become happy. But if the outside world is in mess, but if you have your inside world in place, then you can handle the outside world better. So actually, if you think deeper, the inside world is more important than the outside world, and it is more subtle. So the science to fix the inside world is also more subtle and more involved than the science to fix the outside world. As I said, the overwhelming is a balance of the two. The second one, spirituality is also based on logic and reasoning. For example, just like you have good teachers and bad teachers in science. So some teachers in classroom, they just tell you, you have to accept their face value. If you argue, if you ask questions, they will say, you are not allowed to ask, you will understand later. Right? We all have encountered such teachers. Also, we have encountered at least a few teachers who were patient to listen to our questions and who have tried to explain the concepts and tried to discuss the matter with us, right? Invited challenges from us. And we learned better from them. Similarly, in spirituality or religious studies also, we have both good and bad teachers. So it's not that the subject itself is dogmatic. It also depends who is teaching the subject. So, just like a good science teacher, a good religious teacher or guru does not demand blind faith. rather encourages questions and clarifies doubts through logical discussions. In fact, in Bhagavad Gita, chapter 4, Gyan Yoga, verse 34, it says, Tadvidhi pranipatena pariprashnena shevaya upadekshayanti jnanam jnanina tattadarshina. So that means you are encouraged to ask question and inquire the spiritual master and then learn the knowledge from him. Okay. The third aspect is spirituality is verifiable. So proof is in the pudding. Every religion or every spiritual sect, they have a systematic procedures. So these differences of rituals or systematic procedures, they are just like different approaches of studying the same subject in different colleges and different universities. Okay? But the subject matter is the same. So if you follow any one particular standard and one particular bona fide, time-tested, well-established standard, then you will be able to get the result. But you cannot deny it without practicing it. So that is not science. So if your science teacher tells something, you cannot just deny it. You have to do whatever the teacher says. You have to do the experiment. If you don't see the result, then you can deny it. So here also proof is in the pudding. So most often we criticize spirituality, we criticize religion without ourselves practicing it. So that itself is unscientific. So for example, say before accepting or denying something is acid or base, in chemistry we do litmus test. So the same thing in the spiritual conclusions or spiritual lessons. Okay? Next, I would like to point to two approaches in science for gaining knowledge. One is deductive, the other one is inductive. So the deductive process has some pillars. So the first pillar is axiom. And axioms are something which are accepted as they are, and they are not supposed to be proven, or there is no evidence that is sought for them. They have to be accepted as they are. For example, the Euclid's 5 axioms of Euclidean geometry, or the 5 and 6 axioms or postulates of quantum mechanics. You are not allowed to question. Then, on these axioms, you apply rules of inference. For example, in Aristotelian logic, you have modus ponens, that P implies Q together gives you Q. Those kinds of rules of inference. Then you have some theorems or statements, and then you have proofs of those theorems. So that is deductive science. Science also has an inductive aspect. For example, the discipline of biology deals with mostly inductive aspect, where things are not proven but follows this procedure. So you have axioms, of course, to start with. Then you have hypotheses, that means statements that can be true or false. Then you have experiments and observations. And based on your experiments and observation, you draw the conclusion. That means you either support the hypothesis or you reject the hypothesis. Right? Now, the traditional hardcore science deals with both these aspects. Fine. But the deductive aspect of science has some inherent problem. I will just give you 2 examples. There are many problems. These are just 2. So one problem is due to Gödel's first incompleteness result. So I'll read it out and try to explain in simpler words. So it says that in any deductive system that satisfies the requirement of effectiveness. So any deductive system means what? Means a system which follows this procedure, axiom, rules of inference, theorems and proofs. For example, mathematics. And which satisfies the requirement of effectiveness. Effective means what? So you can systematically enumerate the theorems or the proofs. And you can check whether any proof is correct or not. For example, in mathematics, if a student submits a proof of a theorem, the teacher can verify whether the proof is correct or not by following the logics that is presented in step-by-step manner the proof is written. So that is meant by effective. And some minimal adequacy conditions. So that means the capacity to do elementary arithmetic, for example, say sum or product or combinational notions. So any deductive system, that means this kind of axiom, inference, theorem and proof, for example, mathematical logic or say axiomatic set theory or axiomatic quantum mechanics, any kind of science, there are sentences that are true but not provable in the system. So this itself is a theorem of mathematical logic which Gödel proved in 1931, which says that in any such system there will always be some statements which are true, but within that system it is not possible to prove. Now what people do extended axiomatic systems. So they extend their system to prove it, but what happens, you have an axiom system A, you add some more structure into it to create an axiom system B. So in axiom system A, you have some true statements which you cannot prove mathematically. But when you extend it to axiom system B, you can prove it. But due to this theorem, in the resultant extended axiom system B, again some new truth statement emerges which cannot be proved in the system B. And you can go on this hierarchically to ad infinitum and find statements which cannot be proved. The second incompleteness result says that any such system cannot verify its own consistency. Consistency in a logical system means you should not be able to prove a statement and the contradiction of the same statement. For example, you cannot prove it is raining and it is not raining at the same place and the same time. So that is consistency. To prevent proving, say, A and the complement of A. The second incompleteness result says that any axiomatic system cannot prove or verify its own consistency. So what I want to say in this context is that we talk about science, we talk about mathematics, we talk about logic, and we ask proof for everything. We ask, can you prove God? Can you prove the existence of soul? Right? We ask spiritual persons these kind of questions. But we forget that even in mathematics and science we cannot prove everything. We cannot prove every true statement that is there. So that means just by logic and just by inference it is not possible to capture all the truths that are present in the universe. Maybe it is possible to capture some truths but not all of them. So the inductive paradigm also stands, and there are stark similarities between the inductive process of science and the inductive process of spirituality. For example, both are based on axioms. For example, in spirituality you can take the existence of soul and the existence of God to be as axioms. Both talk about hypotheses. So for example, in spirituality you can assume that when you connect soul with God, you can become perfectly happy. That is a hypothesis. But of course that hypothesis can be true or false, and there must be some procedure to verify that hypothesis. So there are experiments and observations in both the field. Particularly in spirituality, there are many processes in every religion. As Professor Chaudhary explained, that religion is a formal expression of spirituality. So in every religion there are formal procedures, there are algorithms, there are step-by-step processes to actually do the experiments and verify the hypothesis. And we often do not do the experiments ourselves and blame that these hypotheses are wrong. But people who have done these experiments over time, they have always arrived at the same conclusion. So it is in our hand to do the experiment and then either to accept or deny. So for example, in Vedic philosophy, you can take the process of yoga to be the process of experimentation and observation. So once you do different ladders of yoga, then you can see whether your hypothesis that connecting soul and God will give you ultimate happiness is at all true or false. Okay. I will end my talk with a few questions. First thing is that we often say religion is the root of all riots and fights in the world. Should not religion be banned for global peace? I encountered this question when I was organizing weekly discussion session on science and spirituality when I was doing my MS in New York. That time one guy from the student organization actually challenged me, and he was from physics, and I asked him that, well, from physics we have atom bombs, so why don't you ban studying physics in all the universities? Okay. So it's not the question of science, it's not the question of spirituality or religion. Everything has good and bad applications, right? and the subject cannot be blamed for that. So for example, when America launched atom bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, Einstein was very sad. He said that I should not have discovered E equal to mc square. Because of that, only these things have happened. But we know that E equal to mc square is not the one to blame. It is the people who have used it to blame. You can take, for example, the case of a knife. The knife can be used to murder a person, or the knife can be used to cure a person, to do operation, right? So the knife is not the problem, the use is the problem. Next, one common question is, why follow a spiritual path? Cannot everyone invent one's own path through one's own life's lessons? So this question, one of my current PhD student asked me a few days back, and I will give the same answer here. In science, does everyone reinvent the wheel? So do we say that, okay, I will invent electricity and then use it at my home? I will not accept that, okay, electricity is reality? We don't do it. We reuse things all the time to save time. Of course, if you want, you can reinvent yourself. It may take long time. You may not achieve it in your one lifetime, but anybody is welcome and free to do it. Similarly, in spirituality, no one has to accept on blind faith whatever has been stated. One can reinvent the same wheel, but it's a matter of how much time you have in your hand. I say that if you accept the aspects of spirituality that is well explained to you by good teachers, you should accept it and reuse it, because you can save a lot of time. Another pertinent question that we encounter, that why follow a spiritual master or guru? Cannot one follow a spiritual path on one's own? That is also a common concern or blame. So then I ask you, why then we need a lab instructor to do the lab? Why do we need a PhD supervisor? We can do on our own, right? Of course, there are few handful of people who probably do not need a master, but they are geniuses. So unless you think yourself to be a spiritual genius, that you are specially empowered by God, then probably it's better to follow a spiritual master, just like in your PhD. So everybody is not Tagore, that I hope everybody understands that. The next aspect is that does not spirituality promote superstition and weakness? For example, stones or fortune tellers. Nowadays we see almost 90% of the TV shows talks about, we have this problem, you take these and it will fix it. Then the caste system, untouchability, and so many things. Well, we take these things on the face value, but if you study deeply the scriptures, be it Bible or be it Quran, be it Bhagavad Gita, it does not matter. At least I have, whatever I have studied, I have known that none of the scriptures of none of the religions talk about these things. These are created by man to make business. So the parallel analogy in science is that when you have a mobile phone, you also have the possibility of MMS scandal, right? So when we had our postal system, we had less problem. Then we had email, we had little bit more problem. Now we have mobile and our iPad and everything, we have more problems. So with more technology, more advancement, more facility of life by science, we also parallelly have more and more problems, sophisticated way of crime and so on and so forth. So do we stop using mobile? No. Normally what we do, we try to find protection. We try to build tools so that these things can be avoided or detected and punished. But in spirituality, we are so much enamored by the dogma of science that we do not take a scientific view on spirituality. Whenever we see some problems, we try to take it as a face value and try to deny the whole subject, just like denying the mobile phone or the credit card. There is another example of this bank fraud. So credit cards have more frauds than the old cash-based banking system, but we don't throw it away. Right? The way is to build mechanism to protect it. So in spirituality, if you are really interested to know what is the real meaning of spirituality and how spirituality is connected to these superstitions, then you should take a scientific view. There are ways, I tell you, there are ways to detect these pitfalls, prevent these pitfalls, avoid these pitfalls. But the problem is the awareness is not there, proper education is not there, discussion is not encouraged, as Professor Chaudhary also explained, universities and colleges and governments and authorities are totally averse to these things. They have taken a completely unscientific view on spirituality. That is the problem. And the last question. So science gives tangible results. For example, AC in the summer. So are not spiritual results intangible? Well, so when you achieve something and you feel happiness inside, so is not that happiness also intangible? Or when you say my mood is not okay, amar ajke mon kharap, is not that also intangible? So spirituality is the AC of your summer of mind. So it's in your hand whether you want to welcome it or you want to reject it. Okay? So I would like to end my talk with a famous quote by Albert Einstein. He said, science without religion is lame and religion without science is blind. So probably instead of science blaming religion or spirituality and vice versa, we should join hand in hand and take a scientific view of both, because spirituality is no less science than the so-called science. Thank you.